Man to Man podcast. Mike Makowski, Dennis Lemire. We're back again.
Yes.
We're finishing off. I think we think we're finishing off. I say that and then I immediately go, "How do you know?" Right? Like, good luck, right? So this has been a month actually. Looking at the date from when we started this, it was October 12th. Actually, was when we first
Wow.
started discussing this. And so we've gone through quite a bit, and we've been talking about our three like main areas that we see are coming against men internally. Effectively, is what this is. So that some of it is the things that we experience as men. Some of it are things that are coming against us in externally. But there's three real things. One of them was confusion. We talked about and how we can overcome that in our lives. We talked about that when it's confusion, it's not from God, just by
Yeah.
design. We have to accept where we are. Sometimes we have to take a deep breath, right? I don't know what to do, but that's okay. So
Right.
I'm just going to take a deep breath. We have to focus on what we know, right? I used that the other day actually with the guy who I was talking to. He reached out to me in a moment of need, and he said, this is what I'm feeling. And I said, well, you know that that's not true though. And he goes, yeah. I mean, I know it's not true, but I'm feeling that way. And I said, okay, but let's focus on the fact that we know it's not true.
Yep.
And like that one thing was the only thing that we needed to work through that was just, that's
Wow.
not true. And so focus on what you know, right? And some of it might be, hey, what I know is that this isn't true.
Right.
And so go with that. Be patient, right? Allow ourselves the time to work through things. Allow time to happen. So those are the things we talked about with confusion. Despair, right? A lot of times despair is another area. So confusion comes in. Sometimes confusion leads to despair. Sometimes the despair can lead to confusion, right? But in the end, those two kind of got to go hand in hand. You can kind of bounce in and out of it, right? Like some days you're super confused, you don't know what's going on. Some days you're just in this state of despair. How we can work our way out of that. We talked about giving your burdens over to God. Break the pattern, right? If you've always done what you've always done, then you're always going to get what you've always gotten, right? So do something different, break the pattern, free your mind, lean on others, right? That community of men that we're building, and then look for meaning, right? Look for the purpose and the meaning of it all. Look for what is true and right, and run towards that effectively. So confusion and despair, we cruised through and we got through in the last two episodes. So go back and watch those if you have not watched them. And so we're going to sort of wrap this, to cap these three off with what we think is what we've come up with in our discussion as where people usually end up, where guys usually end up, where I've ended up, frankly, and that is in this this place of passivity, right?
Right.
Is
Right.
this idea of, man, I've been through all the confusion, I've been through this deep despair, and I've tried it all. I've tried all of these things to try to get my way out of it. I've done even the things that you guys have talked about,
Yep.
maybe even right in the podcast. Hey, the guys could be sitting there thinking, hey, I tried those things, and it just didn't work for me. It didn't. I didn't get the result that I was looking for, or I didn't get any result, and I'm still just here.
Right.
And so then they slip into this state, or we slip into this state of passivity where you just kind of throw in the towel and you just kind of go, you know what? Then I'm kind of done with this. Then I don't know that I really want to keep trying effectively because it's not worth it. And I
Right.
think that there is we talked a little bit, and I think that it's important that there's a big difference between what we're talking about passivity and maybe some of the other things that guys feel as they work their way towards that. And those things can be broken out of. And I don't know if you want to go into some of that, before we kind of kick off into passivity here.
Well, I mean, when you look at passivity, basically it's someone that's inactive, non-participating, uninvolved, yielding, resigned, emotionless. I mean, when you
Mhm.
look at that, how often when we're confused or when we're in despair, it will lead us to those things. Like you and I talked about, you're just throwing up with the hands and going, well, whatever, I mean, obviously something isn't right, so I'm just going to let somebody else do it. Or that's another definition of it. It's actually accepting or allowing what happens or what others do. And
Mhm.
so it's basically waiting for others to act in my life. And when you think about it, when you're confused or when you're in despair, especially when I was in despair, That's what was my expectation.
Right.
I needed someone to come in and fix me.
Mm-hmm.
I needed someone to come in, but I wouldn't do anything to reach out for that. But I would definitely, think that my boss needed to change, or my coworker needed to change. I'm going to throw up my hands with all that. But then you can become passive. And when you look at passivity, you see it in the scriptures often. I mean, you see, one of the main reasons that Eve ate the fruit was because Adam was passive. He just didn't do anything about it. He was right there with her. John Eldridge does a great teaching on that, he's just passive. When you look at David and Bathsheba, I mean, where was he? He was up on the roof. He should have been at war with all the other kings.
The scripture says, right, when time, in a time when kings go off to war, David was sunning himself on his roof, effectively.
Yes.
Homeboy was in the tanning bed.
Yeah.
And the time when kings go off to war, he's at the beach.
He's having a margarita sitting in a tanning bed on a roof looking at naked women in their bathtubs. So
right.
That's passivity, right? I mean, there's even when the disciples fell asleep on Jesus, when Jesus said, he went into the garden to pray, and they fell asleep. And the one that I think was interesting was the one where the disciples are in the boat.
Right.
Yeah. And the wind and rain are pouring down, and they're like, Jesus, save us. And he's sleeping.
Yeah.
During it. And they're like, that's being inactive. He even says, he said, you faithless, whatever, or whatever, he goes, don't you realize that you can move mountains, and so so you see it happened often where we just fall into despair. Fall into passivity. Because why? Because we don't feel like there's anything else we can do. Mm-hmm. So why do anything? Right. Why do anything?
Right.
And then, well, we did talk about, we can, and maybe you can touch on this a little bit, but then we can become passive and go, well, God, it's your deal.
Right.
Or just waiting on the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? There's like that vindictive waiting, right? There is, now let's be clear for people. There is in scripture a lot of times when it's, when you're instructed to wait.
Oh, yes.
When God moves in God's time, right? And God's going to do what God's going to do. And so there are a lot of times when we are instructed to wait. That is the place that we are in, is a place of waiting. And we're not talking about that. No. But there's a waiting, like, hey, okay, I'm waiting for God to move in an area, or to instruct in an area, or whatever. And then there's like that vindictive, you know what? Fine. And God, you do it. Right. You do something. Right. And I always think of that. I actually showed you that cartoon. I think of the Incredibles cartoon, right? Where Mr. Incredible's talking to the kid on the trike in his driveway. And he's like, what are you waiting for, kid? And he goes, I don't know, something incredible to happen. Right. And he goes, me too, kid. Me too. Basically just that reservation of like, we all want something amazing to happen, but what are we doing to make it happen?
Exactly.
What are you doing I shouldn't even say to make it happen. What are you doing in the meantime, maybe even until it happens, right? And throwing up your hands and saying, fine, God, if you want this to happen, then you do it. I'm here.
Well, yeah. So then we we religionize it too. Like, instead of being active and doing something, I'm going to be inactive, expecting God to do something, and then say it's waiting on him.
Right.
And why? Because that's the good Christian thing to say. So you've been waiting on something for 6 years, it's like, and God's up there going, I've got plenty of things for you to be doing.
Yeah. Right. You could do something.
Do something. Right.
Here's another one, like, and I'll just call some people out on this one, right? Guys that are, that are waiting for dating. Yes. We're waiting for a spouse, right? Like I talk to guys who are like, I just want to be married and have kids, and and I say, okay, well, what are you doing?
Right.
I'm waiting for God to bring me the right woman.
Yeah.
Like from where? Right. I mean, like, gonna drop her in your lap?
Right. Right. Exactly.
When has that ever happened in history? Right. I mean, Like, so, like, I mean, like the mailman, like if that's not it, who's going to come up to your house with a package and ring the doorbell and you're like, oh my gosh, God brought me the perfect woman. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you mean by that? I mean, like
Yeah.
in your head, how do you think that looks?
Right.
You know,
Oh yeah.
but how many guys that's it. I'm waiting for God to bring me the right woman. Well, she's waiting for you to get off your butt and go out and meet her.
Right. Exactly.
Come on, man.
Go on a date.
Do something.
Do
Yeah.
something.
Say
that's
hi,
exactly right.
smile and wave. I don't know.
Yeah. Wink.
Right.
Do yeah. And then once again, then you have, and then you wonder why you have so many Christian men struggling with pornography and masturbation.
Yeah.
Because God hasn't brought the right one yet. So it's almost like
maybe you're not the right one is the problem. Is the way I mean, where my brain.
Well, that's
goes.
a whole other podcast there,
yeah,
bro.
that's a whole other thing. But that's where my brain goes. Is is there might be a whole lot of women that are the right one. Maybe you're not the right guy. So, anyways, we could go down that road. But there's a lot to that passivity. But the passivity we're talking about specifically, I think, in this is this idea of I just either I don't know what to do anymore,
right,
or I think I've tried everything, right? How many times have you heard, man, I've done everything. Yeah. And as soon as I hear that, I immediately go, well, no, you haven't.
Right.
It's impossible to do everything. It just is. Right. Like it is impossible to do everything. You may have done everything that you know. You may have done everything that you feel you should have be doing, but you haven't done everything.
Right. Exactly.
You just haven't. And I think, step one is accepting that.
Right.
Because once you accept that, man, I haven't done everything, then you start to look around and go, well, what else could I do?
Yeah.
Right. I just had this conversation with somebody the other day and I said, if you think that you've done everything, put yourself in the shoes of the parents of a kid, a 5-6-year-old who has cancer, right? They're going to do everything. Yeah. If somebody says to them, hey, you know how you cure that cancer is you rub lemon juice on their feet every night. Guess what? They're going to try it. No matter how weird it may sound, they're going to do it because that is their world.
Right. Right.
And they're going to try everything.
And that's what's interesting too about that tried everything for me. Whenever many times when I've said that to myself, I'm going to try everything, or I've tried everything. Mm-hmm. The Holy Spirit says, no, you've tried one thing a lot of times.
That's good. That's really good.
A lot of times. And it's not working, but you keep going back to that same stupid thing that doesn't work, and so, I mean, that's when the times when I've done everything when it comes to my relationship with Carrie. No, you've done one thing 100 times.
Right. Right. And expected it to change.
Yeah. And expect it to change. Exactly. So, and when that's what we're talking about when it comes, we can get passive. And we want to throw out here too, I think that there's actually a good passivity. Mm-hmm. There's a good passivity. I mean, when you look at the scripture, when you look at the scripture in the Bible, the one that keeps coming to my attention is Jesus could have, told legions of angels to kill everybody. He could have gotten off the cross, right? Mm-hmm. But he didn't. So was that being passive? It was being passive because he knew what he had to fulfill. Mm-hmm. He knew what God's plan was for his life. And so, there's a good passivity. If you're being passive about something because you're working in God's will of doing something in your life, there's things that you have to be passive about. Mm-hmm. And
there's also a passivity in that, right? Like to me, there is that sometimes the best thing you can do is not to do anything. Right. Like in that instance, I mean, it's a great example, and even you were talking earlier about, Jesus in the garden, and Peter whips out his sword and lops the guy's ear off. And Jesus goes, come on, dude. Like, really? I could have called down angels to wipe out all these guys. I could have called down legions of angels to wipe out everybody. Right. What are you doing? Basically, right? Like, just stop. And, and in that, if he could have done it in that instance, he obviously could have done it while he was on the cross. That's not passivity, but that's in that moment. The right thing to do is to not do that.
Oh, exactly.
So sometimes that is, and I think Mick, one of the guys that we, one of the guys that we work with closely and is on the board for Man to Man, right? He he is great in where he'll say, you know, I just felt like it wasn't the time to have that conversation.
Right. That's
And
good.
so he's acting in his inaction. You know,
Yes.
like this isn't the time to have that conversation.
Right. Yeah. And that's why positive passivity is still making a choice to do good while waiting or to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that came up to me is the multiple different jobs I've had. Um, you know, as being a pastor of a church in many different areas, you know, I've had also jobs at Cub Foods,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had jobs at Ace Hardware, you know, and I'll never forget the one time I was working at Ace Hardware uh, when I was swapping, or when I'm not swapping, but when I had to step out from a church. And I'll never forget that me feeling degraded,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and me throwing my hands up in the air is like, okay, well, I guess Ace is the place for the helpful hardware, man. This is going to be Mike Bukowski's life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was out in the parking lot because my boss said, hey, I want you to go out and sweep up the cigarette butts. And a guy pulls up in this BMW, and this 6, 7 year old kid comes out, gets out of the car with this guy. And he said, see that guy right there? And the kid's like, yeah. He said, that's why you're going to go to college, so you don't have a job like him.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So trust me, I wanted to go,
Right.
but then I knew I was part of a bigger plan. And I knew that God spoke to my heart and said, you know, when I questioned what God's will was for my life, he said, Mike, you're my will wherever you work. And I got to talk to a guy named Dave who was an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I led him to Christ, but I know when I left Ace Hardware, he said I was the only Christian that he could talk to and could share his stuff and not be condemned for it. Right. And that's where I think, you know, when we get to that point of throwing up our hands and being passive about, we got to go, wait a minute. What am I here for?
Mm-hmm.
What's the real story behind what we're doing? Right.
Right.
And so, that was tough for me.
I
You know,
bet. I bet.
that was hard. When you step out of a church being paid a certain amount of money and you have to take a job for $12 an hour,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or 2 or 3 jobs at that point in time to make sure, you know, it's very easy for me to just throw up my hands and go. It was very easy. And then what was interesting is, I don't mean to get into too many of the stories, but what was interesting is that last time when I was at Cub Food, and I really thought, well, God, whatever, you're not doing anything, so I must become a meat guy. And that's where my wife stepped in, and I was walking down to go to work down the steps, and she said, good morning, Pastor.
Mm.
And then I was like, what did she say that for? And I came home that night, and she's like, how was your day, Pastor?
Mm.
And she did that like 3 or 4 times. What was she doing? Or more than that, probably 10 to 12 times. And she was reminding me, right, of the story, the bigger story.
Right.
And I had to take action on that. That's when I had to be like, oh, that's right. I remember this. Okay.
Right.
So.
And I remember when we were at the basic, you know, at Honey Rock, when that first one, and you know, not to tell your story, but you know, we were there, and you just said, right, like I felt like I wanted to be a pastor. I feel like that was what I wanted. But
Yes.
God kept bringing you to, hey, I want you to serve men,
Yeah,
and to lead men, and to be able to disciple and teach and so into men, and you kept, yeah, you know, in those pastor, you know, as a pastor, I can do that, right? And finally God brought you to the point where he was like, stop, just like, here is what this is what I have for you.
Right.
Like I've given you this, now just embrace it effectively.
Right.
And
Yes.
And even that, right? I mean, it can lead to, I don't know what you're talking about, God. Like, I don't know what you want from me.
well, I became passive in what pastor supposedly meant.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
It was a title.
Right.
And so, you know, God was reminding me that, you know, there's way more to, here's specifically what it is. This is what it is. And you just kind of became passive in the title of you're a pastor. And so this is what pastors do, you know? And so he woke me up. You were there. I was bawling my eyes out and snot balling, and, you know, but the one thing that we know is that positive passivity still makes plans for the future.
Mhm.
I mean, you're still making plans for the future. You're still trying to walk out what God's called you to do on this earth. And negative passivity claims there is no future.
Right.
So why try? You know,
Mhm.
obviously God's given up on me. So why don't I give up on me? You
Right.
know,
Right.
so
And it drags you to that, again, it drags you down into that, that cycle of confusion, despair. What
yeah,
we've been talking about is it can cycle this passivity, and then and as you try to, I'm gonna pike up my boots and I'm gonna work my way out of it, and then suddenly you end up working yourself back into confusion and
that's good. Yeah.
despair, and then it just produces this cycle in you where you just continue to do it over and over and over again, and that, like, that's hard. Like, at some point it becomes really hard to get out of that,
Right.
and we just had this conversation the other day, yesterday, I think, even, right, about, you know the answer to that is to focus on the positive things, right? I mean, funny enough, you said that to me, is, hey, we need to focus, maybe we need to focus on the positive things. And it's on my, I like to write things on my bathroom mirror for me and the boys to, to kind of have as reminders. Things like on my bathroom mirror, it says, find the positive in the situation. Like, and it's been there for, like, I didn't just write that. That's, when we talked about this last night, it's probably been there for like a month and a half, 2 months now. When, we listened to we were at a church service where that's what he was talking about. Ryan Leake was, about finding the positive in things, and searching for the positive. And
Right.
so, God had spoken that to me months ago. And here I am searching for answers, and God, God, what are you saying to me? God, what do you want me to do? And he's like, dude, you wrote it on your dang bathroom mirror, right? Like, you
Right.
know, you know,
Right.
why are you asking me?
Right.
Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, but how that cycle, how you can just get into that cycle, and a lot of times it's in front of you and it's right there.
Yeah.
And you just have to, it's tough. I mean, let's face it,
Yeah.
it's not easy when you get in that despair and that confusion, and
Yeah.
then you throw up your hands and you say, I can't do this anymore, because sometimes you might not be able to. And I think there's a difference between being, going into a season of refreshing and getting yourself, right, and all that, and being passive. To me, that's almost like, lifting weights. We both are trying to work out. I lift weights. I'm not sure what you're doing for your workouts right now, but I know you were. You have to take days off
Yeah.
in order to let your muscles rest,
Yeah.
in order to build. If you
Right.
don't, if you just keep breaking them down, you're not going to gain anything.
Right.
You're not going to grow. You're not going to be able to lift more. You're not going to get stronger. You actually have to allow those muscles time to rest and repair in order to then use them again. And so there's a difference in between that time of resting and repair and being passive. And again, like, we're not talking about that.
Right. But once again, why do you rest and repair? Is because you know that's going to benefit your future when it comes to weightlifting. So you're seeing the future. That's why you're
Mhm.
doing it. So you're right. You step back, and you know that that's what it takes. Why? Because you know what the future holds. And if you didn't know that, you probably wouldn't do it, right?
Right.
Because no, I don't know that. So I'm just going to work out every day to my hardest of my ability and tear things up and
Right.
wonder why I'm not getting any stronger. It's because you're not doing that. But negative passivity is basically making a choice to do nothing.
Right.
And when you look at those examples we gave, for being passive, when you look at exactly what happens after that, with Adam, he hid from God,
Right. Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Was passive, sin entered, caused him to hide from God.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it causes us to question, where is God? And we're the ones hiding from him,
Right.
right? Then you got David. David's passivity caused him to ignore the calling that he had to be king and what a king's responsibility is,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when we become passive, we step away from our responsibilities as men, fathers, husbands, coworkers, CEOs. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's when you become passive, we could step away from that. And then
Mhm.
when you look at the boat, when you look at the guys on the boat, they expected somebody else to do what they could have done themselves,
Right.
but so you just look at those things. And if you're in that spot, if you're hiding, if you can't seem to find God, or you're hiding from God because of stuff going on in your life, you could be falling into passivity. If you're ignoring your responsibilities, you could be falling into passivity. Or when you want somebody else to fix your mess,
Mhm.
you're probably heading into passivity. And so, because the opposite of passivity is activity, it's activeness, it's energy, it's vigor. I mean, I was watching a guy on YouTube from this men's channel now that I've been participating in, and this guy was talking about what God's doing in his life. And I'm telling you, Denny, this guy was just ecstatic about life. He was excited about what God's doing. And I'm like, yeah, I need that again. I mean, he just exuded direction and confidence and activity and just imagination. And I'm listening to this guy and I'm just getting fired up. I'm just going, why? Because he believed in something so thoroughly, this ministry that he does. He believes in it so thoroughly that he talked about roadblocks, but roadblocks my butt.
Right.
God's in this, you know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
so I mean, that's how God designed us as men.
Right.
We can't not be active,
Mhm. For sure. So, I mean, so what do you do, right? Like, so we've gone through what passivity looks like, some examples of it in the Bible, all that stuff. So what do we do? So again, the question that I've asked the last few weeks and we'll continue with, so you've got a guy who's watching right now, he's listening to all this and he's going, you know what? You're right. I kind of have thrown up my hands. I kind of have given up and just said, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm lost to it. So give us a couple of things that guys can do in order to, I mean, you just said the opposite of passive, and I think that that's probably the place to start right there, right?
Right. Yeah, we've got to understand that God has called us into action.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, we'll say this many times that John Eldridge says, we're called into a love story in the middle of a war, in a world at war. And war demands action. I mean, you can't,
Right.
you get passive in war and you're dead. I mean, that's just all to it.
Yeah, I
Um,
think both of us went through basic training, and the thing that they talk about in basic training, right, is movement. If
yes.
you get in a situation where you're under fire,
Yeah.
you have to move. That is
Yeah.
what they teach you how to move. Like you learn like 6 different ways on
Yeah.
how to move, but it's
Right.
basically like move.
Right. If you ever watched the movie Hacksaw Ridge,
Mm-hmm.
when they're under attack, that one guy's hiding and he goes, "Hey man, a sitting duck is a dead duck."
Right. Right.
It's just the truth, and so that's something we have to, this is where, once again, I get into Old Testament stories
Mm-hmm.
when I feel like I need to step into action. I start reading David and Goliath. I start reading, Isaiah and some of the things that he did when it came to other gods and how, and why? Because you see that I, once again, believe that that's just going to stir me up. That's going to stir
Mm-hmm.
up that heart's intent, that reality of what God's called me to do. And so you got to find ways, and it could be different. It could be worship. It could be country music. It could be, I don't know, but you have to understand that God's called us into action. So we need to become active in doing something.
Okay. And I mean, and honestly, there's, like we talked about before, there is a lot of there's a lot of things that the Bible has called us to do
Right.
that you don't need direction on. Like you can go back to those types of things,
Right.
where God says, like, hey, you should be taking care of the poor. You should be looking after the elderly. You should be, taking care of people that can't take care of themselves. Like that's just things that you do as a good person. And
Yeah.
so, in the end, if maybe you don't know the direction that you're supposed to be going in your career or with your family or in your next in school, if you're doing school and you're not sure what to major in and all that stuff, right? I mean, there are things in the Bible that you can be doing that we
Right.
know God has called us to do. And so
Yeah.
fall back on those. Start
Yes.
there, right? Where are you serving in your church, in your local church, right? I mean, I know a lot of
Mhm.
people that say, well, I don't believe in a local church and this and that. Well, I'm telling you, like, maybe it's time to start.
Right.
Frankly, I mean, if you don't know what to do next and you don't believe in a local church, There's a place to start right there.
Right, right, exactly. And multiple times when I had the other jobs at Ace Hardware, Lowe's, Caribou Coffee, what God, that's I'm keep going back to Hacksaw Ridge. I don't know why, but when he was up on the hill and he was the last one, and everyone else left and ran from the hill, he's like, God, I can't hear you and I don't know what to do. And all of a sudden you hear this little voice say, medic.
Medic.
And it's like God reminding him of what he was in that war for in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
to be a medic,
Right.
to save those right. And that's like you said, it's falling back. And many times whether I was at these different jobs and I started thinking, well, you know what, this is it. All of a sudden he'd bring a guy my way that wants to talk to me,
Hmm.
or I'd have to re-go, how many men have I called and checked up on? How many guys have I said hi to lately? And it usually wasn't any. Why? Because I was becoming passive in what God called me to do based off what I was doing as an Ace Hardware guy.
Right.
And that's exactly what. So I think that's so great. You gotta remember that God called you into action. And so what can you be active doing? Usually what God's told you to do in the past, or what that God's called you to do, the plan he has for your life. It may not be at the place that you think you're supposed to be at, but you can still be that guy in that place.
Mm-hmm. And then I think in that, right, the thing that we need to remember sometimes is that, 2 Peter 1:3, right, that says, by his divine power, God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. We've received all of this by coming to know him, the one who called us to himself by means of his marvelous glory and excellence. So that verse right there gives you something that you can do is, how well do you know the one who has called you to himself, right? He's given us everything we need for living a godly life. We receive it all by coming to know him.
Yes, so come on.
If you want to know what's coming next and you want everything you need in order to live a godly life, you have to know. So start there. Again, that's something that you can do, is just maybe continue to just try to understand, the thing that we talked about, maybe last time or time before that, was about asking for understanding versus direction, right? Help me to understand you more. What we are doing at Man to Man are calling men into this. We call it masculine initiation, is the term that we like to use. But what we're really doing is calling men to find who they are according to how God created them. Yes. God created each and every one of us for a purpose. And if you don't know what that purpose is, and you don't know what God has created you to be, then that's where you can start, is in that, right? Morgan Snyder talks about, in his book, Becoming a King, how, to take a decade, to take 10 years of your life and devote it to becoming. That's right. That's I know, like, there's a lot of guys that we know who are like, well, yeah, I get what he's saying, but I'll just go with 6 years long. And that's why I really maybe have 4. No, devote 10 years of your life to finding who you are and becoming, and watch what God does. Oh, yeah, you're going to take 10 years, who knows? But devote that to figuring out who God has created when he created you, and see what happens in that, because that right there is a big undertaking.
Well, then you're operating out of your true identity. That's what you discover. And, you've got to share this because you shared it before, but, so number one, understand that what God's called us to action. All right. Mm-hmm. Number two is we are part of a bigger story.
Right.
We're just part of a bigger story. And I want you to share what you got from that scripture about a godly life.
Yeah, the thing that I think is amazing, right, in that scripture, that 2 Peter 1:3, is that, it talks about we have everything we need to live a godly life, not to live life.
Come on.
But to live a godly life. And so if we're out there asking, like, hey, God, what do I do in this job? What do I do in this? I think the example I used was about, your kid. I have a 17-year-old. He's getting ready to go off to college, right? And it's, well, God, what is it going to be for Josiah in his future? Where is he going to go to school? Is he going to go to school? What's he going to study? And God's like, help him find me. Right. Like, if you help him to find me and who he is, his identity in me, then the rest of the stuff, I mean, do you think he's going to get a terrible education in one place and not in the other? If he has me as his identity, if he knows who he is, he's going to be fine, no matter if he's a doctor or a mechanic.
Right.
If he has his identity rooted in God and who God created him to be, then he's going to be successful and be able to carry out what God has for his life, no matter what he does next.
Right.
And so the big thing in that verse is that God's given us everything that we need to live a godly life, not to live life.
Right.
So
Right.
focus on that part of it.
Right. And that's the bigger story. That's what we're talking about when it comes to, in order to get out of passivity, you got to realize that you're part of a bigger story. Right. Your life and what you're doing is just not it. It's not everything.
Right.
And just, I mean, when we read that, my brain started to go, I give you everything you need to live a godly life. I'm like, what has he given me?
Right. Right. Yeah. Right.
I mean, God revealed to you what you've given to me.
Right.
So that I can live this godly life. We spend so much time trying to get God into our life.
Right.
When reality is God says, yeah, you're probably wondering why you don't have what you need.
Right. Right.
Because you're dealing with the wrong kind of life. I told you I give everything you need to live a godly life, And so right away, what a journey that will be just to go on and going, God, what is it? What are the gifts and the talents you've given me so I can live a godly life?
Right.
I mean, you could start there, and I know some of mine and my core beliefs and all that going through Heart of a Warrior. And, so, I mean, but, there are times where God introduces something new and that's always exciting. But that's what just excites me about that scripture is if you've given me everything I need, what is that? What are the things that I've got to lead a life that's godly and brings you to the world? I mean, there's so much more to his life than there is about my life.
Right. So many times we focus on the smaller story. And I mean, and honestly, let's face it, it feels like the bigger story. I mean,
yes.
in so much because it's what we know. It's our life, right? Like to think about the fact that the majority of our life is lived in the smaller story. That's the reality, but that's hard. It really is. It's hard because it seems like it's so important, right? I mean, my boss wouldn't agree with me that getting up tomorrow morning and working is part of the smaller story, but it is really, I mean, it is, I say to my team often, whenever somebody screws up on my, I manage people, in my chimney sweep. And whenever somebody screws up, I always say to them, hey, good thing is we don't install pacemakers. Right? I mean, because you screw up if we do that and we're in trouble. But we don't do that, right? So we're okay. We're gonna be all right. And and in the end, that's the difference between small story and bigger story, but still not the even larger story, which is what God is doing in and around and through us.
Yes.
And that's the thing, somebody said to me, Tara said to me the other day, right? Like, how come you didn't come to this realization of these things earlier, in our life? And it was a great question. I mean, it really was like, it has resonated with me and it's got me thinking, obviously I could have taken it poorly, but it really is resonating with me because my thought is like, that is a great question. Why do we not realize these things? Why do we not see the larger story until you finally do? And again, I could unpack why this and that and the other thing, but the important part here is that once you have seen it, once you've realized, oh my gosh, I am living in this small story and there's this way bigger story, the real question is, what are you going to do with that?
Exactly.
And I think that's what we're trying to call guys out of in these last 3 series is exactly that. Like, don't just sit in confusion and despair and passivity, but realize that you're there. And now, what are you going to do with that realization and that knowledge? We've given you things that you can try. We've given you steps that you can be a part of, but really the idea is to embrace your part in the bigger story.
Yes.
Give up the idea that, man, I should have realized this earlier. Yeah, we all probably should have. In the end, it would be great if all of us did when we were 10 years old, realize, man, we're part of this bigger story and we all were these amazing evangelists for Christ throughout our whole life, right? That would be great. The fact is, we're here right now realizing this. And so what are we going to do with that right now?
Yeah, right. And the other cool thing is, that we have a father, or we have a God, despite our crap, mistakes, blah, 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 invites us into his story.
Right.
He's not expecting us. He's not, we don't have to be perfect for it, but no, he loves us so much that even in Mike's crappiest of crappy days, he's just still like, no, you're so much bigger than this. You're so much part of a story. He invites us into it, despite our stuff. Just goes to show you how much he loves us. The reality is he knows us better than we know ourselves. He's got our hairs are numbered. I mean, all these scriptures that say that, and just the reality that, oh my gosh, that's right. I'm caught up in my story, but God, you still love me, and you still know that I'm important to your story here on this earth. And what a father, what a father, what a father.
So good. So, again, confusion, despair, passivity, three things that we saw. We've gone over them the last 3 weeks or month. We've kind of got, I think we've broken this down pretty well. Any final thoughts, wrap it up, things that you want to on this series, to kind of put a bow on this one?
Well, to put a bow on it, I think kind of one of the major themes is the reality of that we as men are designed to do something. And the only way out of things many times is because we just don't do anything. Or we try something and then we give up so quickly. And, one of the things that we talked about earlier was, in order for you to, because the question that every guy asks is, do I have what it takes? Right.
Question in every man's heart. Yep. Is, do I have what it
question
takes?
of every man's heart is, do I have what it takes? And the only way you can know you have what it takes is to do what it takes. And so I think all these last three, confusion, despair, and passivity, requires us to do something, to take action in some way, shape, or form to get out of them. And so that's kind of the bow. I don't know, maybe you got something else to put on the bow too, but
no, man, I think that's it. I think that's, that is what the call to action that we're trying to invite men into. So if you, I mean, hey, if this has touched on you guys, if you're out there and you're hearing this and you're like, oh my gosh, and you're stirred by this, right? Go to our website, mantoman.org, right? It's linked in the show notes on every show. But go there. There's resources that are there. There's past shows that are there. Share this with people, right? I mean, a guy who may need to hear some of this, or you feel like would be interested in this, so share it to him. The other thing is we have a retreat coming up in January. We're going back to Luther Park in Danbury, Wisconsin, and we're going in January, which is always it's cool because it's a way to kick off the year, right? I mean, you're starting off your year with devoting 4 days to listening to what God has for you as a man, which is an amazing thing, but it's also crazy because it's friggin' January in Wisconsin. And so it's always cold. There's always snow. It's like, it is extreme and it's fun and we always have a good time with it. So join us in that to explore further. Again, you can go to the website and click on events and you can find that and invite somebody to come, right? And if you've gone to a basic already and you don't feel like going to another one, invite somebody to go, bring somebody else with and let them experience this. We all know someone who needs that. Take action in that. Then if you're in these areas and you're feeling despair, confusion, or you're reserved, you've relegated yourself to passivity, like take some action, join in with us. Like we are calling men to create a movement that changes the trajectory of manhood as it exists in the world right now. And we are part of this massive, bigger movement that's going on across the country and the world, calling men. And so take that action is what I'll say is just join in and do something. Share this. If that's the smallest thing you could do is share this. It's like the littlest one, is share this podcast with somebody else. Or one of the podcasts with somebody else. The bigger step would be to join us in our retreat or reach out to us and get some resources to help yourself out.
Yep. Definitely become a part of the movement. I mean, be guys that are inviting other guys into transformation and into reclaiming their masculine soul. And I think the one thing we have never really said when it came to our winter retreats, if you are a snowmobiler or a four-wheeler guy, bring them, because there is free time that you have. You know what I mean? The only problem is with that is that I get to drive one if you bring it. So, but I mean, so I mean, if you're some guy that, you know, that's what you love to do, you know, you can definitely bring them. There's tons of trails in Danbury, Wisconsin, all, you know, and for four-wheelers and for snowmobiles. But yeah, I think these three things really are plaguing. I think God's really spoke to our hearts on how we can get out of it. So let's help each other and do it.
Sounds good, man. So the next podcast too may be a little bit time coming because we're leaving on Thursday to go to Colorado
Yes.
to go visit John and his team and his crew. And I couldn't be more excited than I
Yeah.
am. Possibly like there's no like if I got more excited, I would just pee my pants. So like I'm like on the verge of peeing my pants excited
I
about
just
it.
did. So
Okay. Okay. So you went one step further. Nice work. So I mean that's how excited I'm excited for that. So we're going out there next week. So yeah, obviously there may be a little bit of a gap. There was a little bit gap in between the last one and this one. There might be another one, but we'll see you back here soon.
all right.
All right.